Welcome to Solutions with Courtney Anderson. I am Courtney Anderson. I appreciate you being here today. This is episode number 180. So we have done 179 prior shows of Solutions with Courtney Anderson. This, of course, is our audio daily talk show, radio show program that airs Monday through Friday. And we also do have a companion video show or television show. So please come to CourtneyAnderson.com and check out all of our content, all of these programs, all of our video programs, our articles on the blog. And this is a show that is one of the Joyful Art of Business series. And so the Joyful Art of Business, of course, is one of our fundamental principles. And I just mention it often in programs and educational experiences and speeches. And the idea here is, of course, that we want to take responsibility for us and ourselves. And we want to do strategic planning to ensure that our lives are going to give us a return on our investment that we feel positive about. So everything that we do, whether it's paid or volunteer or generically, I just label that business. And we bring something individual to what we do. We call that our art. And the concept here is that we're not just going to look and ask ourselves, how much money do I make? What do other people think of me? What accolades or achievements or awards have I received? And then try to use that as the only determination of what we're going to do each day. No, what we're going to do is ask ourselves, how do I feel? Ideally, we want to feel positive more often than not. Again, not that every moment of our lives is just going to be, ecstasy and excitement, but that when we wake up, we think, yeah, why not? I'm looking forward to it. What's happening? And this is important. We don't want to end up in a situation where we're miserable, we're unhappy, we're self-destructive because we didn't pay attention to a central issue with the time that we're investing in our lives on tasks and endeavors. And that is, how do we feel? Is this something we want to do? Not what other people think about us, not what other people want us to do, what we feel. And so the positive that we're aiming for, we're just calling that the joyful feeling. So the Joyful Art of Business series, this is, again, unbelievably in many aspects, the 180th show of this program. I do ask you to stop by CourtneyAnderson.com. That's where we're going to have our show page for episode 180. And we're going to have all the notes and links and everything that I'm talking about in the program. We also are going to have the opportunity for you to see and support our show sponsors. Those are going to be the advertiser and affiliate links that you'll see on the site. Of course, we are constantly adding new material and programs. I do want to ask you to share your feedback. Let me know what you would like me to consider for show topics. If there's a suggestion or concern, please reach out and let me know. And if you have found our show to be beneficial, please think about sharing it through your social media. And if there is an opportunity for you to leave a rating or a review on iTunes or Stitcher or anywhere else that you're finding our program around the world, please do so. This is one of the most enjoyable things I do, this program. And to be able to present information that I've been, teaching and lecturing and speaking on for the last 16, 17 years to a global audience is awesome. And like I said, this is intended to also provide useful ideas for you to ensure that you are surpassing your goals. This show today, our specific episode, is fascinating. So the specific show that we're dealing with here today on episode 180 is, would you rather be a pig happy or Socrates unhappy? Is ignorance bliss? Again, we're asking, would you rather be a pig happy or Socrates unhappy? In other words, Is ignorance bliss? That's what we're asking. Now, like I say, it's fascinating, and part of I've mentioned in many of the other programs, like I said, it's really enjoyable, the program. I love it, right? So it's all the things that I've been, teaching and practicing as a professional, and now it gives me an opportunity to really share this information with the global audience, with you, my community members. One of the things that's a challenge is that I just get so caught up in the research for our programs that I get in these sort of cul-de-sacs where I get so lost in thought and researching, and I go on these tangents, and then before I know it, I'm running up against my time frame for our show schedule. So this is a perfect example. Let's get to it. The question: would you rather be a pig happy or Socrates unhappy? Okay, if you haven't seen that idea before, where it comes from, the genesis for that part of the title is from an ethical and philosopher. So he's an ethical and philosophical scholar, and so his name is John Stuart Mill. And so, as I have mentioned in other programs, and I do across the board, I don't like to make assumptions about what people do or don't know. Partially because we have, of course, a global community audience, and there's so many different types of topics we talk about that there are going to be people who come to the show with a lot of background about some of the subject matter, and there are going to be people who come to the show and they don't have any background. So I don't make assumptions about what people know or don't know, and so I do try to at least acknowledge that I'm aware of a diversity of experiences and backgrounds, and include, especially in our show notes, it's, in links to and additional resources to help community members who are like, oh, I'd never heard of this, research a little bit more. So, and I oversimplify things, obviously, when I just sort of trying to lay out the framework or big picture of an issue, because obviously, we don't, just the time. So if you don't know who John Stuart Mill is, great. If you are an expert and you wrote your dissertation on John Stuart Mill, great. The point is that question, right? Pig happy, Socrates unhappy. That's where we are deriving that information originally. So John Stuart Mill, obviously, if you go to the show page, CourtneyAnderson.com, this is, of course, episode 180, you'll see some links. So I put some links in there to help first address this issue of what is this thing, pigs and Socrates, and what's going on. Okay, so the content on the show page, let's start here. There's some content on the show page that's from Frostburg University, and that's a university in the States, in the U.S., and it's actually in the state of Maryland. It's a sister campus to the university that I teach in the graduate program, which is the University of Maryland University College. I teach MBA students from around the world in my online courses. So this is an educational institution I'm familiar with. Is there, like I said, a sister campus through the state University System of Maryland, or University of Maryland system. So you'll see the show link in the show page. You'll see a link. So we're trying to answer these first questions just to make sure we got a basic understanding. John Stuart Mill, again, this person studying ethics and philosophy, wrote a book called Utilitarianism. If you haven't heard of that, utilitarianism is a philosophical concept, and basically it means that your test to see what you should do, right? What do I do in life? Do I get up and brush my teeth? Do I get up and go rob a bank? That the test is you want to do things that provide the greatest good for the greatest number of people. And so John Stuart Mill is researching and thinking about these things, similar somewhat. I'm going to make a beautiful, I believe, apt analogy. I believe that John Stuart Mill, similar to us, right? Now it's a different time period that he was alive, but he was like us. We're thinking, we're sharing knowledge, we're researching, we're trying to figure out, there's so many questions. And so just like us, certainly spent a lot of time pondering and ruminating and considering things. Now, we're not necessarily in his field of expertise, and we may not have his body of work, but just the idea of what the quest for information, I'm going to say that we're similar in some ways, right? John Stuart Mill wrote a book called Utilitarianism. It's first published in 1861. So 1861, so like I said, a different time period. And that's where this quote came from, right? So the quote says, "It is better to be a human being," that's us, "dissatisfied than a pig satisfied. Better to be Socrates dissatisfied than a fool satisfied." So again, this idea, right? Happy pig, unhappy Socrates. That's sort of the genesis for the question. I also included in the show page links to Stanford University, which has an explanation. Again, these are very simplified because you're thinking, okay, so somebody named John Stuart Mill wrote this book. The book was published in 1861. It has this information asking or addressing, do you want to be a satisfied or happy pig, or, Socrates, unhappy, right? And so I mentioned this idea of utilitarianism, and so go to the show page. There's a link there to the Stanford University site, and it will give you some, good background, about utilitarianism, because again, we don't want to make assumptions of what people do, or don't know in terms of familiarity with different philosophical schools of thought. And so that'll help you. Again, it's this whole idea of, this is from the Stanford page, there are many varieties of the view discussed, utilitarianism is generally held to be the view that the morally right action is the action that produces the most good. Okay? So morally right action. What do? Do I wake up and go, brush my teeth, take a shower? Do I wake up and do I go rob a bank? You can't figure it out. You don't know what to do. So you could use this concept of utilitarianism to be a framework for you to make decisions. And you could say, okay, well, what produces the most good? And also there on that Stanford entry, it explains, again, these are really, dense subject matters, but we need to get a big picture understanding so we can just, understand enough to start to orient ourselves to the show topic, but to life in general, right? So honestly, I suggest in many different programs, sort of like I strongly suggest you should at least heard of this author or read this, or I'll suggest in programs you really need to have a framework for information. I talk about data as your friend. I strongly suggest that you have I would suggest a daily practice of getting information and knowledge about the world from credible sources. It could be a leading newspaper or whatever, but you need to be exploring your world and taking in new information is my strong suggestion. So if you've never studied philosophy, if you have a background where you never were exposed to these ideas in school, you need to take some time and educate yourself, because it's one of those sort of foundational areas of knowledge, and it's definitely something that you're going to use in business. Certainly in my graduate programs, I spend tons of time. I teach ethics and frameworks, and we I teach utilitarianism and then other theories, and so you need to be aware of this. Not again like you're going to devote the next 30 years of your life to these individual concepts, but you need to have heard of it. So that's part of the reason why I mention these, and then and try to provide you a couple of points to in the show page for you to go explore a little bit more. Because if you've never heard of it, I'm telling you that you need to. Okay, so again, it's sort of explaining, what do I do? I'm not really sure it's the morally right thing to do. What's the ethical thing for me to do? The right thing. Do I rob the bank? Do I brush my teeth and get ready for work? I don't know. And so utilitarianism, you're going to ask yourself, what's going to produce the greatest good for the greatest number of people? And you also want to remember that in utilitarianism, in general, that there's this view that you want to look at your own, what you call good, and then other people. So it's not just like you. Right, so you might say, well, I rob the bank, so then I'll be rich, and then I can do whatever I want to. Well, no, but then you harm the people at the bank when you commit the violent act of the robbery, and then you harm the business, and then you harm society, and then there's extra costs in pursuing you for criminal issues and locking you up. So it's not an egocentric only, like you're the only entity in the whole universe that matters. It's the greatest good for the greatest number. Okay. So check that out and kind of get a thumb on what we're talking about. So the question in the show, right? Do I want to be a happy pig, or do I want to be Socrates unhappy? Well, first I wanted to explain a little bit about where the idea came from. There have been many other people who are also some of the sort of foundational philosophers, like David Hume and other people who I strongly suggest that you read about and get a better feeling for sort of this field in general. But at a minimum, John Stuart Mill wrote the book, first published 1861. The book's literally called Utilitarianism. And that's where the quote about, do you want to be this, the pig satisfied or Socrates dissatisfied? So we're just using language. It says, happy pig, Socrates unhappy. I mentioned a little while ago these cul-de-sacs I get caught in of research, and part of it is, well, once you start going down the path of trying to think, well, this quote, I don't want to assume everybody, is taken, either formal study or on their own and study utilitarianism, because that's not accurate. So then I think, well, I got to, reference that. And then I think, well, I definitely want to be specific about, where this quote came from. And then I think, how much, do we have time for in one show to even begin to mention this? But the way I'm approaching this is I can't ignore, sort of, the source of this. So I have to mention it. And then if I mention it, then I'm driven to want to explain a little of it and provide you extra links to look into it. So you're thinking, okay, all right, now here, let me keep explaining the cul-de-sacs I got into of discovery and awesome. So then I'm thinking, okay, all right, so you're looking at the quote and you're thinking, all right, Socrates, unhappy, pig happy. And then I think, well, what if people aren't really familiar with Socrates? Okay, again, don't make assumptions. So go back to that show page, CourtneyAnderson.com. That's episode 180. You'll see some links. I have a link to an Encyclopedia Britannica. So Socrates, person, was born and died in Athens. Okay, and so a Greek philosopher. So obviously you can see the theme, right? So somebody in the 1860s is writing about somebody who was, Socrates died in the year 399 BC. Right? So this is way before. But you see, there are philosophers, right? So they're all asking these questions. Like, what are we supposed to do? The equivalent of, do I brush my teeth or do I rob somebody? Do I pay my bill or do I, go out to eat and go to a party? These are questions. What do I do? Now we have a whole bunch of systems that try to help us. We've got law, which is supposed to tell you what you must do. Ethics are different. They try to tell you what you should do. Right? So the issue about, do I rob a bank or take a shower and brush my teeth, maybe the law help a little bit. But sometimes when we get into these issues and you really start thinking through this, you'll realize that laws can be unjust. Laws themselves can be unethical. We're not touching that in this program, but I want to mention it. We also know we have a question like, I have a little bit of money. Do I use that to pay somebody money that I owe on like a bill? Or do I take that money and go out and treat myself to something fun? Law is not really going to give you the answer. All right? The law might say, well, you have to pay your bill eventually, but maybe your bill isn't even due. So what do you do today with that money? Pay the bill today, early, or go out and treat yourself to some fun time at a great, having some awesome to eat at a nice restaurant. That's where we're heading into, the ethics of it all, right? Okay, so again, go check out the Encyclopedia Britannica, and I'll give you an example. So Socrates, philosopher, Greek philosopher, again, totally different time frame from this John Stuart Mill, the quote emanating from this work published in 1861. We're talking Socrates, was born in 470 BC, passed away in 399. This is a long time period relative to our human lifespan that we're talking. So obviously John Stuart Mill and other peers studying the prior philosophers. Okay, so Socrates is one of those things, probably if you don't know much about who the person was, you need to. There's another one of these sort of basic things in life. If you, again, are a scholar on this and you're getting hysterically upset that I am, oversimplifying and misstating things, I understand that, but you just have an advanced level of knowledge, and I'm just trying to impart sort of a basic reference that these things exist and sort of kind of what they are. So go read a little bit there about Socrates. I think you'll definitely be interested to see about Socrates, and he lived a very long lifespan, relatively speaking, and what happened at the end of his life, how he dies, fascinating. So here we are. See, that's something intriguing for you if you didn't know. Okay, so Socrates is a Greek philosopher, and many other people who had studied Socrates and learned from Socrates, like Plato, another name you probably heard of, another person who lived another philosopher, is a source of their writings and their ideas and information. That's, a lot of what we use today, and what John Stuart Mill was using in the 1860s. So this question, right? Pig happy, Socrates unhappy. So now we know Socrates, person, philosopher, lived a while ago, relatively speaking, to our human lifespan, and that this person in the 1860s was referencing the person who lived in between 470 BC and 399 BC. So a while ago, right? Relatively speaking. Okay, so that's kind of it. So this person, Socrates, Greek philosopher, do you want Socrates to be unhappy? So we know that Socrates had a combination of actions and ideas that also coincided with, there's a record, right, from that time period that was a while ago, relatively speaking, so that we would learn these things thousands of years later. So let's just say Socrates, we're just going to, for the purpose of discussion, say known for ideas, a deep thinker, shall we say. Okay, now the question is, do you want to be someone who's this deep thinker and someone whose thoughts and actions were so acknowledged? I'm not going to debate whether or not they were accurate or applicable or whatever, but I'm going to say that they did exist. Do you want to be this deep thinker who's unhappy, pondering and thinking and thinking and thinking, what's moral, what's ethical, what do? I don't know, who knows? Or do you want to be a pig happy? Now, of course, pigs are animals, are mammals that many of us are familiar with, because even if we have never touched a pig or owned a pig or hung out with a pig, or many of us have not eaten pig. Some of us eat pig all the time as part of our diet. Most of us have heard of a pig and are familiar with what a pig is. It's a mammal. I, of course, because I get in these cul-de-sacs of just fascination, and I think, wow. When I start thinking, I think, I want to know more about pigs. That opens up a whole bunch of things. One, there's research. Now this is interesting. So the question is a pig, right? So we know what the pig is, right? So it's that mammal. It sort of makes that sort of distinctive pig snort kind of sound. For those of us who are not really anything familiar personally with pigs, we've we recognize what a pig is. And like I said, some people it's part of their diet, some people it's not part of their diet, but irrespective of that, what one is. So then I'm researching. I'm thinking, pigs. There's a link in the show page to a New York Times article, which actually sort of throws our question in a little bit different light. Now remember, the person asking the question about you want to be a happy pig or Socrates unhappy, the deep thinker person, is asking this, in the text, that's published 1861. Recently, in the last couple of years, the New York Times, actually it was 2009, publishes a piece where they're making the argument, and this is the title of it. It says, "Pigs prove to be smart, if not vain." So then I'm reading about that, of course, and there's a link in the show page, and it's basically talking about that there's been some research that shows that pigs actually learn how mirrors work, like you and I do. I'm looking in the mirror when I'm washing my face. I'm looking in the mirror when I'm brushing my teeth. I recognize it's me, right? And they're saying that pigs actually recognize what a mirror is, and then there's research in there talking about how the pig cognition, right? So you're studying how pigs think, right? That says pigs are brilliant at remembering where food is stored and how big that food stash is. It talks about how that pigs are really quick. They're among the quickest. This is a quote. Pigs are among the quickest of animals to learn a new routine. And pigs can do a circus's worth of tricks. Jump hoops, bounce stands, spin and make word-like sounds on command, roll out rugs, herd sheep, close and open cages, play video games with joysticks, and more. Wow. It also says, for better or worse, pigs are also slow to forget. Now here's an expert from the University of Bristol, right there in the same quote, and says, they can learn something on the first try, but then it's difficult for them to unlearn it. They may get scared once and then have trouble getting over it. See that? Look at that. I honestly, because I said I don't have expertise with pigs. I honestly have not. I've sat here, of course, when I'm researching and going through this, I'm thinking, how much time have I individually spent with pigs in my life? Seriously, not a lot. So I didn't know all of this. I honestly did not know that the pigs were, able to do the word like sounds like a man and close and open cages and play video games with joysticks and all this is really interesting, right? I didn't know that the pigs had that kind of memory, right? I also found interesting in the article that there's been research in the last couple of years. Obviously, this is a 2009 piece talking about how there's looking at the pig genome, right, and comparing the pig genome, the genetic instructions, obviously for a certain type of pig, comparing that with human genome. You know, and it says the pig genome compares favorably with the human genome. That's from a scholar expert there at University of Illinois at Urbana-Champaign, and says very large sections are maintained in complete pieces, barely changed in the 100 million plus years since the ancestors of hogs and humans diverged. Now this opens up a whole new Pandora's box of things to talk about and debate. And people, whoa, what's this going on? How is this related to the question? Because it's okay. The question is, and I put in parentheses, is ignorance bliss? Because that's part of what this question is referring to. Now, there are many other people who would say that that's not the most important part, and that the question is really talking about these other issues related to utilitarianism and other philosophical issues. I, of course, then, because I'm just insatiable with my quest for information, start looking to learn more about pigs, because I'm thinking, okay, well, it's one thing to say, well, let's make sure people are clear on who Socrates was. Do we even know who pigs are? And of course, if the modern science is telling us that the pigs have all these capabilities in their cognition, I don't even know that this show topic, of course, which is from a different time period where they had totally different understanding of pig intellect and cognition, and pig genome certainly wasn't studied or available. But the idea simply was that the assumption was that the pig, or just a sort of very common animal, wasn't the most intelligent example in comparison to the deepest thinkers of our human species. That's the idea, right? So would you rather be something that's not very assumed to be a deep thinker, and happy, right? You don't know much but you're happy, or would you be somebody who's all you do is think and think and think and think and think and you're unhappy? That's the question. My point is, I had to, because when I started thinking about it and looking at it, I thought, well, I'm really curious, is the pig really that is the pig that ignorant? Is the question. And so it looks like there's some very new science, which obviously, when this concept was put forward by John Stuart Mill in the text in 1861, he didn't know this. So part of that is, though, for me to answer the question, that we don't even really understand the question. The question is, would you rather be, ignorant and not know things and then just feel good about stuff, or would you know stuff and then because you know stuff, potentially you're unhappy? What would you prefer? My point is that if you really look at it, we're not even sure that we know what the pig knows. And as we uncover more scientific information, it may be that our assumptions about the differences between the pig and Socrates may be proven to be accurate, that the pig has a completely, ignorant state of cognitive understanding compared to Socrates, or it may be, as we uncover more information, that we didn't even understand what's going on with the pig cognitively to begin with. And so maybe we're not even asking the question that we thought we were asking, right? If the pig actually is more, intelligent than we think, then this question is totally changed. Now, obviously, under the historical framework of the idea, when this quote was generated, nobody had access to that information. Here's the deal, though. We don't know what people are going to have access to information in the future either, right? So we don't know. The challenge is, removing the question of Socrates individually and the pig individually is ignorance bliss, which is why I put that in parentheses as a related issue. Because again, when we start really thinking about these things and digging into them, we start to realize that maybe we're not using the right thing when we refer to the pig and make these maybe they're aspersions, saying that the pig's not intelligent, because apparently there's some research that might be opening up a better understanding for us of what's going on with the pig, and maybe that's the issue. So I don't want to get stuck on the individual analysis of Socrates, individual analysis of the pig, but I do think we need to mention that because we don't know what we don't know, it becomes really difficult then for us to isolate the exact wording of the satisfied pig or the happy pig and the unsatisfied or an unhappy Socrates, because for all we know, that question may turn out to not even mean anything. It may turn out that Socrates and the pig are basically thinking and contemplating the same things. Irrespective of, again, the specifics of the pig and specifics of Socrates, the bigger Wider question is, would you rather be ignorant and happy or knowledgeable and unhappy? Now, when we, this obviously when we have our program, Joyful Art of Business is about us, surpassing our goals, and it's all about, whether we do paid or volunteer work, but we're accomplishing things. So it's very, in the field of, our endeavors in terms of work or business, I'm not going to be able to make the argument that ignorance is good. Ignorance is bliss. Because if you don't know what's going on, you're in deep trouble. You don't have a clue what your competitors are doing in terms of other volunteer groups, and so you're going around and you're duplicating efforts, and you're actually causing more harm, because you could have put your efforts into doing something complementary or new, but you're running around and duplicating what other organizations are doing, and you don't know that because you have no knowledge. If you're running a for-profit situation, then if you don't know what people are charging at the market, if you don't understand how much supply and demand there is, if you don't understand your customers' preferences, if you don't have any understanding of your supply chain, you're in deep trouble. You're not gonna, data is not just your friend. I mean, it is your best friend. You have to know what's going on. The challenge, of course, is, and we did a program recently. I don't know how recently, but we did a program, obviously, in this Solutions Courtney Anderson audio show, where we talked about, the smartest thing you can say is, I don't know, because so many people get caught up in, especially in the business field, pretending like they know stuff, and they really don't. But we do it in our, regular lives too. So part of the challenge is, ignorance is not bliss in many instances, because it's hurting you and it hurts other, entities. And that one of the things that's a hindrance to getting knowledge is the fact that people pretend they know stuff they don't know. So that was an issue. And along these lines, when you go to the show page, of course, this is episode 180, and you go to CourtneyAnderson.com, I have a link to a business periodical that has an article, and it's entitled "Ignorance Isn't Bliss, It's Oblivion," right? And then I've put a link in there, and it has a quote where it's talking about this problem. It says, "Today, one of the greatest obstacles to progress isn't ignorance, but the illusion of knowledge, which, as often as not, is bound up in our arrogance and our reluctance to admit that we may not know at all. Real knowledge is as much about knowing the extent of your ignorance as it is about what you actually do know." So you know what you don't know, right? Okay, so that quote's there for us, because obviously when we're talking about business and whether paid or volunteer, getting stuff done, ignorance is really not going to be blissful, because it's going to have a lot of negative ramifications. Now, we could think that in the short term, between our, duplicated volunteer efforts being useless and hurting the population we're trying to help, and, our business failing economically because we didn't bother to know anything about, supply, demand, competitor, customer preference, supply chain, or anything else. In the interim, you might say, well, maybe, yeah, there can be bad outcomes, but what if there's a moment in there where the person is blissful, right? They don't even realize that how they don't know anything. And while they're in that moment of, bliss before it's a catastrophe and the whole thing ends, maybe then they're blissful. So our question again, generically, would you rather be someone who doesn't know anything and happy, or someone who does know stuff, but by virtue of knowing stuff and thinking about stuff and worrying about stuff, and pondering stuff, you're unhappy? Again, it goes back to your philosophy and your big picture, on life. So if you have a position in a worldview that, hey, nothing we do matters, we're all going to, physically leave the body as we understand it to be at the end of our time. So honestly, does it matter if we destroy our nonprofit? Does it matter if we destroy our business? If maybe we enjoyed destroying it, or it made us, we felt happy while we were in that process of, I don't know, typing on the computer, or, calling people on the phone or whatever. People have that belief. Some people believe that everything's predestined. And so no matter what you're actually doing, that Socrates was going to get the same outcome the pig was going to get, and that whether or not they were happy or unhappy was already determined. And they had nothing to do with it, right? They're just sort of, there's a system that's already built, and they just sort of were in that system, and they might have thought that there was something they could do to change things, but they can't. So if you have that worldview, then you'll argue that it doesn't matter what you'd prefer, because you don't have a choice. You're either born and placed or kept in a situation where you are unhappy or you're happy, and whether you stay that way or you become in a different situation is nothing to do with you. It's already determined by some other force or entity. So that's one worldview. And if you have that worldview, then I think you would answer the question that it doesn't matter. It's irrelevant because you can't choose. So you're not going to ask yourself, would you rather be, because you can't be anything because there's no free will. That's one thing. That's one school of thought. And we've talked about that concept in some other shows, right? We did a show, Everything Happens for a Reason, where we touched on a little of some of that, asking those questions. So that's one worldview that would answer the question one way. Another worldview would say that it's, everything is completely random, right? And in some other shows, and in that show about Everything Happens for a Reason, I mentioned, the concept, the theory actually, scientifically, of entropy, right? Systems tend toward disorder. So if you believe your own version of that, or some, well, better defined, more specific version of it's all random, it's all chaos, then again, it doesn't really matter. Whether you're happy or unhappy may only just be some imaginary perception that doesn't mean anything anyway. Because you're going to get the exact same outcome. So it's not predestined at all. It's totally random, but you also have no control over it. That's this underlying issue. Okay, so that's going to help you answer the question again, your own way. You're going to say, it doesn't matter what I would rather be. I have no control over what happens. As it wasn't predestined, specifically, but it is totally, random. And so no matter what I perceive or what I prefer is irrelevant because I don't have any control, and whatever's going to happen happens. Gotcha. Okay. Another way to look at this, though, I think, again, it was more within the framework of sort of, I hate, the lawyer in me hates this, right? The original intent or the legislative intent, right? It's not legislature, but it's not a legislative text, but when the author wrote it, he wasn't, referencing what we would find out about, pig cognitive knowledge or the pig genome and, 100 and, whatever years in the future. The question, though, is ignorance bliss? Would you rather not know? I put a link to it's a piece that's talking about healthcare, right? So the same question, right? Would you rather not know? And it's a NPR, National Public Radio, and so there's a link in the show page, and it was saying how it's asking this question again, right? Is ignorance bliss? And it's basically talking about research, right? That says, and here I'll read this from the quote from NPR: humans don't always behave rationally. Sometimes people will go to great lengths to avoid hearing bad news. Social scientists call this sort of behavior information aversion, or the ostrich effect, based on the old myth that ostriches bury their heads in the sand when they're scared. And it's talking about the fact that people will basically not want to get a medical test. Under the sort of the analysis that, hey, what I don't know, right? So do I have this medical condition? I don't know. I'm not going to get the test. That way, I don't have to know if I have the medical condition. And the NPR piece is saying that might be predicated on this, this information aversion. So it's the opposite sort of me, this insatiable, I want to know, I'm curious, what's going on? I wonder what that says. It's the opposite, right? And so information aversion, what you don't know, you don't know. I talked to a friend one time, this is a long time ago when I was really young, like a teenager probably. And we were saying something. I think she said something like, I don't have to know how to fly an airplane to ride on one. And that sticks with me because I thought, I'm not saying I need to know everything that, somebody with, decades of expertise and one of the most accomplished pilots, in the industry knows. But I'd like to understand the basics of flight. I really would. And on just a personal note, I mean, this might have been similar early, right before the time I first signed up to get my private pilot license, because I'm so interested. Not only do I just read it and study it and stuff, but I want to, get my own pilot's license and, eventually, potentially, do as much as I can myself as a pilot, right? So I really am interested. But my point to her is even if it's something I'm not interested in, right? I'm still curious. Like I said, I myself haven't spent time with pigs. I've not had one as a pet. I've not been in agriculture or been around them a lot. But once I start thinking about it, I am curious. I really am. Not that I necessarily want to go out and change everything in my life, or I devote my life to studying, paid cognitive development, but it's interesting because it opens up things in my world that I didn't know. So I do like information. And like I said, you don't have to be an expert at stuff. I just want to know enough. I want to know when I hear a name or somebody references something, what does that mean? We did a show about, our vocabulary and how important it is to our salaries and our professional opportunities. And beyond that, I mean, to me, that's not even, it's an ancillary issue. The bigger issue is it opens your mind. The more you know in terms of what a word means, it opens up your mind to new ideas and experiences. It's almost like going on some awesome trip somewhere because you brought in something that you didn't even know existed and now you know exists. And then in a way, I would argue that the knowledge of the new existing thing, in a way, it changes your whole life in a way, right? Because now it's expanded or it's enhanced or it's redefined in some way. I think that experience is worth it, even if it's not anything I'm particularly interested in. So yeah, I do want to know. So this idea where somebody intentionally, and the research is, fascinating to me, that you intentionally would say, I don't even want to know about my own medical condition. And by knocking in the medical test, of course, I then won't be able to get the treatment or anything else that could help me. But this whole thing of this, like, I'm going to do everything in my power not to expand anything. I don't want to change, enhance, make better, learn, nothing. Now, you could make the argument again, it's going to go back to somebody's, personal philosophy and ethical framework. And those are impacted by politics and by religion and by lots of different factors, culture, whatever. But if you could say, hey, I don't take the test, then I don't know if I have the disease, and if it's predetermined anyway and predestined, then it's irrelevant because I'm going to get the same outcome, so why bother about worrying about it? Because I don't need to know, because whether I knew or not knew, I was still going to have the same outcome. Some people believe that, based on the chaotic, the version that it's just, it's chaos, and who cares anyway, because no matter what you do, you're going to get the same outcome. To me, in some ways, those are similar. Of course, in some ways, they're diametrically opposed. But the point is, if you think the same outcome is going to happen no matter what you do, then of course, it doesn't really matter what you do or what you know or anything else. I don't know the answer to that, and we obviously just, obviously I don't know the answer to that, but I do think that the fact that we're asking the question would probably lend credence to the idea that we'd rather be the deep thinker, unhappy. Like, I could have not asked this question and then not thought about it, which wouldn't have led me to the cul-de-sac. The cul-de-sac, right? It's like a circle. And in many parts of the world, in the States, it's, like a little end of a street that just ends in a little circle. A cul-de-sac. So you're in there, and it might be really interesting, and there's great stuff there, but you can't, you gotta, there's nowhere, else out of that other than the one way you came in and the one way back out. And that's why I say they're cul-de-sacs. Is I'll get really interested, and then I'll realize I could spend 30 years researching, pig genomes, and I'll never be able to get anything else done. So the fact that I asked these questions leans to the idea that probably I'm going to argue that I'd rather be asking the question, because my perception is, which could be just figment of my imagination, but my perception is that I actually do derive some sense of pleasure from asking the questions. Now, of course, I derive frustration because I'll ask these questions and I'll realize I don't have the next 30 years to spend just on studying, John Stuart Mill, just on studying Socrates, and just on studying pigs, and just on studying, aerodynamics. There's like too much information, and I don't have enough, in my lifespan, that I'm aware of to be able to satisfy all of that. And it's sort of like, well, that's the question. If you never ask the question, you'll never experience the frustration of, I can't, there's just not enough variables. I don't have enough time. I don't have enough resources. I don't have enough waking hours. I'd have to cut everything else out, that I do to cut, to provide more time to try to answer this one part of this one question. And that might make people, so unhappy. But I think that some of the things I was mentioning earlier about some of the science regarding, pigs, we don't know what the pigs are thinking. So again, it's not specific, but even the idea that there's some ignorant entity, right? And it's just sort of walking around and it's ignorant. A, we don't know it's ignorant. And B, we don't even know it's happy. But let's just say that it exists. Let's stop arguing that and say, okay, there is an ignorant thing, and because it's ignorant, then it has less unhappiness, And wouldn't you rather be that thing than be something that is more knowledgeable? But now see the knowledge in it itself Like I was saying how awesome it is to learn about a new thing because it changes your world, expands it. I said it's like going on an awesome trip, right? Some people would argue, I don't want to go on an awesome trip because what if I go on an awesome trip and it's really great, but then I come back to where I was before and now I see the world differently because I remember that awesome trip, and even though the trip itself was awesome, now I'm depressed. I'm sad, I'm anxious because before I was satisfied, where I was because I'd never been on an awesome trip. But when I went to that other awesome place and I saw how awesome it was, I come back to my place that I'd been staying before, and I think it doesn't even seem, like it satisfies me at all because I've experienced that other awesome place, and now my sort of all right regular place it is not the same. Okay, well then that's the reason that many people don't do anything, right? I'm not going to eat new food because for all I know it'll be great, and then I won't want to eat the regular food. I'm not going to go anywhere different or read anything or learn a new word or have a new idea. I'm not going to get the medical exam or ever go to the dentist or care about any of that because what if they tell me something and it's good news? What if I get the medical test and it tells me something great? What if that makes me feel, then I'm sad because I think, well, I'm going to live a really long time. And I wasn't even that excited about my life to begin with. Now I'm maybe stuck here for decades more. For us in our community, the fact that we ask the question answers the question. If we were the pig happy, then we wouldn't ask the question, right? If we were happy in ignorance, we wouldn't even ponder that. We would just be happy in ignorance, and by definition, we wouldn't be sitting around wondering, should we, is this happiness? Is it enough? Should we seek more knowledge? We wouldn't even ask. So that answers the question for what we in the community, you and I think. I mean, obviously, we're already doing this, asking questions. Would we rather be happy or unhappy? Most of us would say, I'd rather be happy. I even make the whole series, Joyful Art of Business, predicated on this idea that you don't want to just say, I made money, or other people think I have a good job, and then sit around, be miserable and self-destructive and feel that you're, unhappy. I mean, that's the whole point of what I said. And so as we perceive it, I don't have the answers, obviously. Is happiness anything? Is it real? Is it all relative? I don't know, obviously. If I did, then I'd be somewhere the leading global international scholar on that issue. So people, 1500 years from now or more would be studying my writings. Maybe that'll happen in my future. Who knows? We can all hope and dream. But all I'm saying is that I do understand that I don't know what I don't know. And so here's the thing. It's difficult for me as a proponent of the joyful art of business to sort of unilaterally make the argument that you should pursue knowledge and that there's some sort of either complementary or side effect that will give you some element of a positive outcome just through the process. My perception is that I do derive pleasure from the process. I am aware that, of course, the more I wonder and ponder, then, of course, the more questions I have and the more things to think about and the more I wonder, right? But my perception is that gives me a sense of pleasure. The challenge with the question is you would have to be the ignorant entity and have no understanding that you're that ignorant. You'd have to have no understanding that you don't know what you don't know. And in that instance, you may actually think you are knowledgeable and a deep thinker and have not a clue that you're not knowledgeable, and you may actually be blissful. The challenge, though, is wouldn't that apply to all of us? I mean, when we look back at, from, John Stuart Mill in 1861, we think, oh, well, they didn't have access to this information about the pig genome and the human genome, and they didn't have some of the scientific information, whatever. But, and so it does change how we look at things because they didn't have a lot of the technology and things that we have, tools and knowledge base. But my point is that we also don't know how little we know right now. You may think you're Socrates, but we may actually be the unhappy, the happy pig and have not a clue. We may think that we're the deepest thinkers and, look at this. We're, the examine life and we're really doing it. And it turns out, when people look back at our lives, they're going to laugh. And not maybe in a derisive way, but just sort of like, wow, it's amazing they were able to get stuff done. Sometimes when I'll think back and I'll think, wow, you study like a hunter or gatherer society, and you think, wow, no they had the access to fire, intermittently. There's no shelter. You're literally, all that you do, your conscious time is, you're hunting and you're gathering stuff to eat. It's amazing. You think, well, wow, that would be a totally different lifestyle than today. Who knows how people will look back and judge us and think those poor sad things, they thought they were Socrates unhappy, but they really were the pig happy, and they didn't even know it. Well, of course we don't know it. That's the whole point. So I would argue, maybe in that position, maybe ignorance is bliss, because I don't even know what I don't know. The challenge is within what I think I know. There are benefits that my personal advice and my professional advice definitely is that knowledge is power. Knowledge is excitement. Knowledge is adventure. The knowledge can open up opportunities for you to have different experiences, so you don't say you're bored, so you don't say that your life is dull, in a way that's not destructive to society. You could be a thrill seeker, of information and experiences, and you're not like a thrill seeker that, commits criminal acts and hurts other people. The sort of elusive idea is, can you be someone who, whether you actually are or you just perceive yourself to be, trying to be, a deep thinker? So can you either actually be one or actually not be one, but think you are, because history will judge that you were ignorant. But can you be the entity that believes itself to be or actually is a deep thinker, and simultaneously have any kind of contentment? I hope so. I certainly, would be uh, remiss if I didn't mention that, there's another stereotype that, sort of, the more people, are sort of intellectual, then the more that they're, unsatisfied, because they're thinking all the time. And I did have a quote here on the show notes from Harvard University, and it's a publication, for students and everything, and it's basically talking about how it says here, psychologist James Webb reports that highly intelligent people are more likely to suffer from what he terms existential depression, which entails struggles with basic issues of existence, mortality, freedom, isolation, and meaninglessness. And so, of course, again, the students at Harvard, certainly by many measures, one of the finest uh, institutions of higher education in the world. Historically, you would argue that a student who's there, who's gained admittance, has at least some indicators of either, extremely, a lot of tenacity or some sort of gifts academically or intellectually or something. And that the argument is, well, now you think all this stuff, and that's why, maybe you have depression symptoms or issues, because you're pondering all this stuff, that instead of you pondering, your issues of existence, you could just, have less complicated things like, I'm hungry, when I get something to eat, and then you'd be, again, more satisfied. We'll call that happy, instead of being unsatisfied, because you're not going to be able probably to answer, in the same time frame as getting something to eat, what's the meaning of existence? Okay. Again, as I already mentioned, so much of this depends on your entire worldview. And if you say, I don't have a worldview, then that's your worldview. Do you ask questions, or you're not interested? Curiosity, again, these are all, a lot of this is just my worldview, my personal preferences. I enjoy, or I perceive that I enjoy information, learning things. So for me, if I couldn't learn something, if someone said you can just sit here and you can get something to eat and you're comfortable, right? We'll make sure the temperature is comfortable. We'll make sure that the lighting is comfortable, but you're not going to be able to do any of this stuff where you go, get in these, information cul-de-sacs, and you're researching and you're recording and you're thinking and you're writing and you're teaching and all this. None of this. I think, I could be wrong, I don't know, but I think I'd be unhappy. And when I worked a long, long time ago, when I was, a teenager, in jobs that didn't require any higher level thinking, they're repetitive, like stand here or wear this uniform, do this one thing. I did them, but I believed, I felt like I was bored. I didn't feel happy. I felt like it was boring and repetitive, and I wanted to do something that was interesting and different and exciting. Now that all could be my own skewed perception. So it may have some validity. It may relate to how you think. It may be useless, and you may think, well, I don't feel that way at all. I love things like that are, the same, and I don't have to sit around and ponder and think about things that there's not, quote, the answer to. So again, so much of this is predicated on these questions and issues. The show, I have to say, as we come to closing, it was in my personal life. It was someone that I respect immensely. That was sharing with me that they'd studied in an academic program and spent time in a course over a term or semester, wrestling with this. And I thought, we were talking about other things, but I thought, I see how you could spend a whole semester or a lot of time in a course thinking and working through this, because there's so much, right? There's looking at, philosophy in general and ethics and, John Stuart Mill and David Hume and other philosophers, and studying Socrates and Plato and what we know of, ignorance, and what we know of knowledge, and what we know of happiness, and what we know of unhappiness. And so, it opens up all these great, think great questions. I do think that you've already, you know your answer. Again, I'm making the argument that by virtue of being here and being part of the program, then you're gonna want to think that you're interested in deep contemplation, whether or not it makes you, quote, happy, or even if it brings you a little bit of unhappiness because you don't, quote, have the answer and you can't resolve everything. Otherwise, why even be on this program? I do think that we have to understand that we may be absolutely and totally, quote, wrong. As we said, it may be that history looks back on this time period in us and thinks, wow, that was really the nadir, like the lowest point ever of knowledge. I can't believe how pathetic it was. These poor people, they didn't know anything. That may be, we don't know. So, I do hope, though, it helped you think about some of these things. If you weren't familiar or hadn't heard of some of these things, it gave you something to go research and investigate. Again, it may turn out at the end of all of this that we find out that the pig is more knowledgeable than Socrates was, or capable of, in terms of what the new research continues to tell us about a pig cognitive ability. But so that will turn the whole question on its head. I do think you need to continue to ask yourself, though, as I say over and over again, what's the goal? What do you want? What do you want? And I, again, want to thank you for taking time out of your life to be part of this program and this community. I do, again, ask you to support our show sponsors on CourtneyAnderson.com, to leave ratings and reviews on iTunes or on Stitcher or other distribution networks. So send me your show ideas, comments, questions, feedback, and spend time on these questions and making a decision on what you think, and then understand that, you get new information, and you can revise your opinion and your worldview at any time. So the fact that you're questioning and asking about your happiness, about your desire or quest for knowledge, is evidence that this is a priority. And obviously it is a shared priority that we have, and I'm just happy, as I understand happiness, that you are here on this journey, on this show, and on this program with me. So let's continue forward and keep exploring together. Thank you so much for joining me.